Hello there, Johannes of Whiskey Lore, and time for another whiskey tasting. And today, I'm going to be doing a tasting of a whiskey that I have seen on the shelf. I keep passing it by. I don't taste it. I don't buy it. And finally, I had a friend of mine said that she went to this distillery south of Edinburgh and that she loved it. They had a worm tub there. She is a fan of rye whiskey, and they used to use worm tubs in making Pennsylvania rye. So she was sold immediately on it, and that got me interested. I'm like, okay, I constantly see it on the shelf, and I always pass it by. I haven't had anybody really raving about it, but I have heard people say that it's a good whiskey. So Glenkinchie 12, that is what we're going for today in terms of a tasting. And a little background on Glenkinchie, it's a distillery that came around in the 1830s, but like a lot of Scotch distilleries, it's had its ups and downs through the years, being mothballed, being used for other purposes, and it wasn't really until 1998 that they created their first single malt. Now, this is used as one of the classic malts from Diageo, and so it is going to be found in their Johnnie Walker blend. So what does the actual whiskey taste like? Now, this is what's interesting is you take all of these different components and now you get a chance to kind of taste each individually to see what you think about them. And when she told me that this ran through a worm tub, and then I did a little bit of reading and find out that they have this really large wash still, and it's supposed to be the largest wash still in Scotland, but it has a line arm that drops really quickly. Well, the idea of the line arm dropping quickly is that you're going to allow more liquid to escape. It's not so hard for it to get out, and so you're going to get a heavier spirit coming out of that still because it's allowing the oils to get out, whereas when you have a Glenmorangie and you have the swan neck stills that are really tall, it takes a lot of effort for that whiskey to get to the top. And then, depending on which way the line arm is going, which is what comes off the top of the still, if it's angling down, that's giving the oils a little bit easier time of getting out. Some of them tilted up like that. Well, that is making for a really hard time. And I will give you an example, actually, and it'd be interesting to see how this relates to how this makes corn whiskey or their malt whiskeys and rye whiskeys is Balcones, because Balcones actually has the line arm isn't this way, it's actually this way because it goes up into a coil over the top of the still. So it's really, really interesting to see these different ways and to kind of understand how that affects your whiskey. So when it goes into a worm tub, which is basically a copper coil that is going into a big pool, you could talk about distilleries like Mortlach does that, Springbank does that, Talisker, I believe, does that, Pulteney does that. So there are worm tubs around, but not a lot of them, but they usually create a much heavier spirit unless you distill down, and some distilleries will distill an extra time or a time and a half. Like Springbank actually does a 2.5 time distillation, so that's going to pull out some of that heavier weight in that whiskey. So I'm anticipating with this whiskey that this is going to be a really heavy whiskey because it's, yes, a large spirit still, but or wash still. And to explain the wash still, it's basically once they've got the fermented liquid, solids have been taken out, and now it's being run into the first still. That first still is the wash still because it's accepting wash. And the second still is called a spirit still because now you're taking what are called low wines and you're moving those with some alcohol content higher than, it starts out usually around 8% going into the wash still, and then coming out of there it can be, I've heard anywhere from 30 to 60, 70, well, we'll talk about proof. Yeah, probably not that high in terms of proof out of the first. I think more 60 proof is what I'm thinking, because I'm thinking of US standards on that. But anyway, so you're getting higher in the alcohol as you go. The thing you don't want to do is take out too many of the oils. The oils can make the whiskey interesting, to me at least anyway. Give it some body, make it have more of those flavors that I kind of like out of that oily character. Okay, so all of that comes to this. Now I'm expecting this to be a pretty heavy whiskey. What shocked me about it was that it's not heavy at all. The other thing that surprised me about it is that it is not a sweet whiskey. It is a whiskey that, well, and this is part of the idea of like a Glenmorangie, has the very tall stills, makes it very hard for the liquids to get out, so you get more of your fruity stuff coming up out of the top that can escape first, and so it creates a lighter, fruitier whiskey. So this is taking some of that fruit out. And I still get tropical fruit notes in this, kind of peach note maybe coming through, some citrus notes, a little bit of honey in there, but they're not overly sweet, and they blend in with the grain notes that I'm pulling out of this whiskey as well. I do get like it's funny because I'm probably making you think that this is sweet because I'm giving you some sweet notes, like in this case, those circus peanuts, kind of the citrus and vanilla creamsicle idea. I'm getting that too, but it's all so low in the mix. The grain is almost out front on this whiskey. Cheers. Some of those repeat. That creamsicle note is definitely there. Then I get this mineral note, and it's very out front. And I tried to see if some other reviewers had noted this mineral note as well. If you're a George Dickel drinker, it is that Flintstone vitamin mineral-y note, and it makes me wonder if they actually used George Dickel barrels for this whiskey, because it's Diageo. George Dickel's Diageo. Glenkinchie is Diageo. So it's very possible that they are getting George Dickel barrels for their whiskey, because it is really out front. This mineral note just stands out to me for some reason. Now I still get the honey, I get a pepper note that kind of lays on the palate. It is not sweet when it finishes. Again, it's kind of dried out. It's herbally, floral, herbally kind of a mix there, and not overly sweet. So if you're not a fan of sweet whiskeys, this may be right up your alley, but it's good enough, I think, from a sweet standpoint, that if you are somebody that likes a space side, you may enjoy this whiskey, but probably not as much, because it is going to be toned down on the fruit a bit more, and you're going to have to investigate. But I will say this. I think part of the reason I was disappointed with my first sip of this was, first of all, the weight isn't as heavy as I thought it would be. And second of all, I was kind of in a mindset already of sweeter whiskeys. And so when I sipped on this, I was like, wow, this is actually a lot drier than I would have expected it to be. But now that I know it's a dry whiskey and I'm tasting it, I'm actually liking it a bit more. So it's one of those whiskeys that when I'm in the mood for a drier whiskey, this is probably the one I'm going to pull out and do some sipping on. So have you had Glenkinchie before? Glenkinchie, actually, interesting fact on Glenkinchie, it's apparently named not after the name of a valley, but because Glen meaning wide valley, and then you usually term like the name of a burn, which is a little waterway, and you use the name of that, or maybe you describe what the valley looks like, because you get a lot of that in Scotland. Valley of the Green Grass, which is Glenfarclas, I believe. This one's actually named after a family and the estate, so they're kind of naming it after the estate, the Kinchie family, or De Quincey. I'm not sure how you pronounce that, but anyway, that's where Kinchie comes from, so Glenkinchie. Another one of the Glens for you. Hope you enjoyed this video. Hope you learned something from it. If you did, give me a thumbs up there and subscribe if you'd like to watch more of these videos along the way. Make sure to take part in bracketology as it comes up. We are in the middle of it right now. Round of 32 is what we're making up now out of our top 64. Until next time, cheers and Slainte.